Thank you. I'm just going to briefly introduce or set the stage a little bit. I want to acknowledge that, well, John and I are on Treaty 1, but all of Manitoba comprises the treaties 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 10. And I think it is especially important to acknowledge treaties opening this up because this announcement is fundamentally about our relationship with First Nations and our obligations to First Nations, especially through hydro. If lots of people have not traveled up north, but there has been enormous damage that's been done to various communities by hydro over the years, and there's a real awareness up north that those of us who live in southern Manitoba have benefited enormously from the sacrifices of people up north, whether it's hydro, whether it's minerals, and a series of other developments that have often come at the expense of First Nations and in other Indigenous communities. So the basic topic today is the fact that 45 years ago, Manitoba Hydro received an interim license for the Churchill Diversion or Churchill River Diversion project, and it is about. There's a possibility it could receive a permanent or final license, despite the fact that they really have not done what they need to do to make sure to fulfill what we believe are their very serious obligations to the communities who've been negatively affected and impacted by hydro developments in the north. So I'll just say that to begin with, and then I believe it's Mr. Dysart who's going to be taking it up to explain what's up next. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, actually, Hydro received an interim license in 1973, which effectively gave them permission or authority to dam the Churchill River from its natural flow. That dam, called the Misty Falls Control Structure, dammed up the lake and flooded South Indian Lake by approximately 3 meters. And then the natural flow of the Churchill River, 85% of it was diverted through a man-made channel south and then east and north to the lower Nelson to power the mega dams on the lower Nelson. In 1976, the project was complete and became into full operation in 1977. But Manitoba Hydro very quickly asked Manitoba for permission of testing of the CRD. And I use that term relatively loosely. They were granted almost immediately permission to test CRD, which effectively meant they could do additional flooding and different lake fluctuations that were outside of their interim license. So Manitoba Hydro has not complied or followed its interim license since 1979. Now, in 1986, this testing became formalized as the Augmented Flow Program, which meant it gave Hydro 6 inches of additional flooding and, in essence, an additional foot of dewatering and 4.5 feet of lake fluctuations annually at their whim. This Augmented Flow Program is actually a deviation from license, the 1973 interim license, and it goes against nature's natural fluctuations, flows, and it's just hugely destructive to our environment. Our lands, our waters are essentially being washed away. Our economy was fishing. We're still trying to stabilize our economy, but it's been devastated. Our annual sustainable catches before the CRD was 400,000 kilograms, and since 1 million pounds that were sustainable catches of lake whitefish, which is the backbone of our fishery. Now we're down to less than 1/10 of that in our commercial catches, and obviously this impacts our traditional harvesting for food security. And this is, this is just damage, ongoing damage, increasing damages, and Hydro has applied for a final license, which they are entitled to a final license under the Water Powers Act, but they don't want the interim license they asked for and were granted in 1973. They want the terms of the Augmented Flow Program, in essence, to carry permanently through a final license into the future. To us, that's a death sentence. We know from our lived experience and our day-to-day lives that the operation of augmented flow by Manitoba Hydro, granted through permission by Manitoba is devastation. We know the lake itself won't survive. We're basically on the brink of a disaster here. Our lake whitefish population is in collapse, our fisheries in collapse, and we're just trying to survive. You know, we need some balance on the system and the operation of the Churchill River Diversion. We're not asking for hydro to go away. We know they're going to be here forever. We're also going to be here forever. So we need some kind of balance. What's really concerning, on Saturday, on May 15th, the annual approval of augmented flow expires. The Minister Guillemard's office is not very transparent on what their plans are, what their intentions are, but we have a real sense they're going to try to quietly, behind closed doors, approve yet again another annual approval. People have to understand that this is not a formal environmental review, or the damages are not properly assessed or mitigated as required under the annual approval. It's a simple letter that goes from Hydro to the Minister's office, and always a letter goes back to the Hydro saying, yes, you can deviate from your interim license. Now, deviation is by definition a going away from the truth, a going away from the path. And that's what augmented flow is. You're going away from what you were granted. And they want that into the future. There's two decisions pending. The annual approval, which we understand, we believe that a letter has gone for yet another annual request. They don't share this with the community. I work and represent the Community Association of South Inland Lake also has a signed agreement, not only with Manitoba Hydro, but Manitoba. Part of the language in that agreement says Manitoba Hydro will mitigate all damages or impacts of the altered levels and flows, being the Augmented Flow Program. They're not doing that. They're doing relatively simple make work projects that are really, in essence, beneficial to them as public relations programs, so-called debris management. You know, picking up sticks basically on the shorelines. You know, there's over 3,000 kilometers of shoreline, almost 4,000 kilometers of shoreline. I mean, these programs have relatively no impact in improving our environment, and they're make work projects. And they in no way replace the economics of the fishery, which would be in the multi-million dollars if we had some stability on our lake. The other pending decision is the final license. There is no deadline other than the 50-year term, and both Manitoba and Manitoba Hydro have stretched the terms of the Water Powers Act and the definitions and the intent, the spirit of the Water Powers Act. As biased and loose as it is, it's a dated piece of legislation, but they can't even follow those terms. Manitoba Hydro was to get a final license shortly after the completion of the project, the CRD, and that was in 1977. So they've operated outside of their interim license for, 48 years now. And now they want that a final license, finally, but they want the terms of the augmented flow program, which is hugely destructive. We don't see a future with that. And just through our observations and some science we put together with Dr. Drew Bodley, who is what I would call the expert on lake whitefish on South Inland Lake, we know the collapse, and we sincerely believe the collapse of our lake whitefish population and fishery is due to the operation of the Mississippi Falls control structure. There's Manitoba Hydro, when they have too much water in the system, basically dumps the water out of Mississippi Falls. And in their own words, they call it wasted water. There's no extra revenue generated. In fact, there's not 1 penny of revenue generated by the operation of Mississippi Falls. And they're doing this dumping, this unnatural dumping of water into the lower Churchill more and more often. And it's just devastation, both with the flooding of South Indian Lake and the dumping of water on the lower Churchill. There's impacts to sturgeon. We believe our sturgeon on South Indian Lake and the upper Churchill from South Indian are either extinct or near extinct. Manitoba has undertaken no studies for, well, for the life of the projects to date. And we know with our talks with Split Lake, PCN, the Tataskweyak First Nation, they're very concerned about the last remaining sturgeon population on the lower Churchill. I believe there's about 900 to 1,200 sturgeon that remain, and they are basically dying out. And there's very, very little work undergoing. Some monitoring, but no mitigation to for the health of that population. So, I mean, I could go on and on the destructive nature of the Churchill River. I mean, we're losing islands annually. Shoreline is just being destroyed by the erosion of the high water and dewatering at times. You know, the dewatering and the dumping of water at Churchill, at Missy Falls to the lower Churchill, basically means hydro can't use this water. They have what I call a cross your fingers plan. They'll flood South Indian Lake at their whim to the maximum levels, which just with wind and other factors just creates massive amounts of erosion. And then it rains basically, and they can't control or handle the extra precipitation, and they dump this water. So in essence, they can't use it. Yet we face all the negative environmental impact with little or no mitigation. So, I mean, are we here for questions? I mean, I could expand on a number of these issues, but I mean, in essence, that is the problem. So to clarify, there's two. Go ahead.
I was just going to say thank you, Les. Now I was going to turn it over briefly to John Gerard, and then, or I don't know if Will wants to talk too, but then we'll open it up for questions. So. John, just you got to unmute yourself. So.
Yeah, why don't you go to Will first, and then I'll talk.
Thanks for your time, everyone. Briefly, apologies, first of all, from Robert Spence. He's a councillor, elected councillor with Tataskweyak Cree Nation. Not able to be here today. Basically, the stress of COVID that we all experience has kind of spilled over a bit in their community. So they're in community meetings this morning, and he can't opt out of that. I'm going to just show you a map briefly here. Oh, I guess that's not going to work. Okay. 85% of the Churchill River is the second largest river in the province. 85% of it is diverted, as Les said. So that means downstream of where the diversion takes place, there's only 15% of the water that used to be. And that's where of what used to flow there on average. And that's where part of Tataskweyak Cree Nation territory is up on that area there. The sturgeon are very important culturally to them, and there used to be a commercial sturgeon fishery there as well. This lack of water down the Churchill has severely impacted the sturgeon, taking them to the brink of extinction. So obviously, fish need water. If you take 85% of their water away, that's going to be a problem. And so the numbers, as Les mentioned, of this distinct population of sturgeon, down to 900 to 1,500 breeding adults there. And the Tataskweyak people are very worried that they will be extinct. And the point that Robert makes with great passion is that the fate of the sturgeon is the fate of the Tataskweyak people. They are tied up together, both of them under tremendous pressure and fighting for survival. So it's really a matter of the heart, a matter of spirit. And these fish simply need more water. So the request on behalf of Tataskweyak is that this Augmented Flow Program be suspended, and that there be changes to the interim license so that more water flows down the Churchill River so that these sturgeon have a fighting chance at survival. I'm going to simply, in the chat, I'll send a link to an op-ed that appeared on April 15th in the Winnipeg Free Press. That was from Chief Shirley Ducharme of OPCN, Southern Indian Lake, and Chief Doreen Spence of Tataskweyak Cree Nation, where they talk about how these licenses have been a license to destroy. And this week, Minister Guillemard has a decision to make about whether to approve more of this license to destroy, or whether to give these rivers and lakes and people a break, some relief. So that decision has to be made, and it's an opportunity to do the right thing. I will also include a link to an open letter that was sent from OPCN and TCN to Manitoba Hydro customers, and it includes a list of impacts with some numbers, statistics, as well as a map. So I'll put that in the chat here in a minute. Again, apologies on behalf of Robert Spence, and thank you for your time. I will end it there.
Okay, I'll just say a few words to kind of sum up a couple of points. One, to emphasize that there's been a massive erosion on South Indian Lake shorelines. The water in Southern Indian Lake, the fourth largest lake in Manitoba, is now turbulent instead of clear. As we know, the whitefish population has declined drastically, and part of this may be related to the fact that the rocky bottom near the shore, which is ideal for whitefish spawning, has been to a considerable extent replaced by sediment, which is not so good for whitefish spawning. But it's not the only reason, but it's one probably of the contributing factors. Second, it's important to note that the whitefish fishery once supported 140 fishers and their extended family. So, I mean, its loss is a tremendous economic catastrophe for the community of O-Pipon-Na-Piwin Cree Nation. As Will has emphasized, the Tataskweyak Cree Nation has been badly affected by the loss of the sturgeon, which may now be near extinction. And lastly, there are significant outstanding issues which have not been resolved, that there hasn't been the adequate dialogue and forthright and transparent discussion and open addressing of these issues. And the communities of O-Pipon-Na-Piwin and Tataskweyak Cree Nation are requesting that there be action now to address these issues, and that this action must occur before a final license is issued. So briefly, as in the press release, what they're asking for is a meaningful say for people in O-Pipon-Na-Piwin and Tataskweyak Cree Nations in decisions surrounding the operation of the Churchill River Diversion and the mitigation of adverse impacts from the first 45 years. And this is to include participation in scientific research on impacts and on decisions around mitigation of these adverse impacts. Two, there needs to be financial support to the communities of O-Pipon-Na-Piwin and Tataskweyak Cree Nations to include a share of income from the sale of hydroelectric power derived from the Churchill River Diversion, or alternatively for a share of the water rental fee that Hydro pays to the province to go to O-Pipon-Na-Piwin and Tataskweyak Cree Nations. Three, there needs to be full mitigation of the adverse impacts of the Churchill River Diversion, to include measures to support recovery of the lake whitefish and sturgeon, including consideration of a fish passage or fish ladder at Missy Falls so that fish can swim upstream from the lower Churchill River to Southern Indian Lake. Four, there needs to be a return to the originally approved Churchill River Diversion license and a suspension of the Augmented Flow Program, which has been so damaging. Five, there needs to be increased flows down the dewatered lower Churchill River, especially at the time of sturgeon spawning. Six, there needs to be implemented substantial fines to Manitoba Hydro for any violation of its license, with the money from any fines to go to the O-Pipon-Na-Piwin and Tataskweyak Cree Nations. Seven, measures to ensure there are no massive unnatural flushes of water down the lower Churchill. And eight, meaningful involvement of First Nations in decision-making about the Churchill River Diversion operations and free, prior, informed consent of O-Pipon-Na-Piwin and Tataskweyak Cree Nations with respect to any future license alterations.
Great. Thank you very much, John. And thank you, Les and Will. I'll very briefly say, like, one of the problems that's happened for decades is that both that Hydro has been given, free range to do what it wants, even outside of its own interim licenses. It has continually failed to follow its own interim license and has never been called to account for it. And often when you have northern communities, there is this sort of, because there aren't media on site, which you don't expect, but it's all sort of out of sight, out of mind. If this were happening in southern Manitoba, there would be outrage. There would be absolute outrage about the level of devastation that's happened, but it's often something that's taken for granted, especially when it affects northern communities and especially First Nation communities. And that is Manitoba's shame, frankly. So as Will and others have said, this is really just about asking the Manitoba government and Hydro to do the right thing, because they haven't been doing the right thing for a very long time. And two communities and thousands of people are paying a very serious price for it. And that's not the way we should be running our province. It's not the way Hydro should be running as well. So with that said, I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you. So to all reporters, if you have a question, if you could just raise your hand and I will turn your mic on and you'll be able to ask your question. I will also say, I'm not sure if you were able to record it, but if you would like a recording of this, I can send it to you. So just reach out to me afterwards. So I will go ahead with the first question. Josh Aldrich. So Josh, you should be allowed to talk now. You'll just have to unmute your mic.
Oh, sorry about that. Good morning, everyone. In previous news stories, the province has said that they've been in discussions with the communities up in the north regarding this since 2009. Are there actually those discussions taking place and that consultation taking place?
Effectively, no. As far as Section 35 the required consultation, I was active in assisting the First Nation in 2010, and that was the first formal communication we received from the province. And for the last 11 years, there's just been a series of meetings to try and start consultation. You can call it a discussion, or Manitoba seems to imply all the time that this is somehow meaningful. But quite frankly, there's been no Section 35 consultation undertaken to date as we speak. We tried to re-engage the province and the minister and the relevant departments actively since 2018, 3 years ago now. We met with the minister at the time, Rochelle Squires, on February 2019, and she gave assurance to the chief and the council of OPCN that the department would be in contact with them to initiate consultation. That didn't happen. Now in July of 2020, we received basically a form letter saying consultation is being wrapped up, and here's a record of our communication with the First Nation and the community and a list of concerns. We had major issues with that because the record of communication was so severely flawed. It wasn't an accurate reflection of the meetings, the proposals that have been submitted by the First Nation to initiate consultation. So having meetings to try and initiate consultation is not consultation. You know, and we believe they've effectively closed the door. We were informed in the fall of 2020 that a final license decision would be made. They changed that date. We were informed in January that the final license decision would be made at the end of February. They've changed that date. Now they're stating that a final license decision will be made by the end of the year, which means what to us? They can make that decision any day. There is no deadline or legislation other than the 50-year term of the final license, which they don't have, and it's coming in 2026. So no, there has been no consultation in any meaningful way, and they've rejected all of our consultation proposals, work plans, and budgets. And the chief, Shirley Descharmes, has requested at least 3 times in the last 2 months for a meeting with the minister, Minister Guillemard, so we can talk about the concerns and the lack of consultation, the flawed process, and try get it done. And all we've got is just resounding silence from the minister's office.
And you guys said that there are 140 fish, used to support 140 fishers and their families on the lake. How many fishers are left fishing on the lake? How many fishers are kind of remaining in the industry up there?
Well, very low numbers. It's safe to say there's an average of 40 annually. It goes up and down. But importantly, those remaining 100 or so fishers didn't go away, other than, just passing away, which is bad enough. But they're left, they don't have the means, or the fishery cannot sustain them so they can continue their traditional practices of commercial fishing. And it's important to note the number of 140, you can multiply by a factor of 2, even 3 or 4, because younger generations were active in the fishery with their fathers, uncles, grandfathers, and they weren't licensed fishers, but they were learning the important activities, learning the skills and the important work ethic, and learning to become fishermen, which has been our traditional practice for thousands of years, commercially since 1941. So 140 licensed fishers at its peak, but probably well over 200, 300 active people in the fishery, more than half of our community, if not all, at various times. So on average now there's about 40, and we have gone out to other outlying lakes, what we call inland lakes. So like myself, I have to go to an outlying lake to try fish sustainably. I haven't fished for a number of years on Southern because there's just not enough fish to sustain it in any economical way.
Thank you.
Okay, and next I will Sarah from the Winnipeg Free Press. I'll just you'll have to unmute your mic.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Sorry, so I just wanted to clarify about the timing of this, because I guess this is the part of the story that's confused me a little bit since this started coming up. Is the Augmented Flow Program's been in place and temporarily approved since 1986. So I'm wondering if the damage that it caused has continued to progress. Has it continued to get worse, or has it kind of stabilized? Or I guess I'm trying to understand the timing of the concerns. And is it just that Hydro has now applied for a final license that has brought this up again?
That was my favorite thing.
For sure, the environmental impacts and degradation has gotten worse. There's been no stabilization of the Churchill River Diversion, which was predicted to take about 40 or 50 years. We're in year 40, 47, 48 of the damages, and they are getting worse. Islands are literally disappearing in front of our eyes. Trees, anchors and anchors of boreal forest are falling into the lake annually. Live, full-grown, mature forest is just dropping into the lake because of the massive erosion. There's calving of the land, and it just takes a whole series of forest with it. So no, things are not stabilizing. They are getting worse. And if Manitoba Hydro is issued a final license, which we're calling a license to destroy, it's a death sentence for us. It's a death sentence for our lake whitefish, our economy, and in a sense, our community. We are a welfare state because our fishery, our economy has been destroyed and will continue to be destroyed if Hydro is granted a final license with the inclusion of AFP, Augmented Flow Program.
And I guess the other thing I'm wondering is, has there ever been any I assume that Hydro hasn't done a lot of research in the region that they've given you access to, but have you guys pursued independent research to try and just solidify what you guys already know is happening, so that I'm not sure, but so that there's numbers or data to kind of give us concrete understanding of how this has progressed and worsened?
Yeah, effectively no to date. We had a table, if you will, called the Southern Lake Environmental Steering Committee from 2003 to 2013, and we tried to undertake a number of scientific studies. We found that process a little frustrating because as soon as a study was done, both Hydro and Manitoba representatives were, you can't draw any conclusions from that. So around 2010, I reached out to Dr. Drew Bodley, who was a scientist who did extensive work with lake whitefish through the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in the mid 80s, about 8 years. I reached out to him and said, I'm really frustrated with what's going on here. We're not really moving forward. Our fishery is continuing to decline. So I sent him all the studies that they had done to date, all of the data, and he compiled a report. But in that report, there's a graph that shows the severe decline of the lake whitefish population. And he drew the connection between the operation of Missy Falls control structure and the massive dumping of water at times. And he showed our commercial catches of lake whitefish declined by half the following year. So if you're around 400,000 kilograms and they do a massive dumping of water in excess of 30,000 cubic feet, the following year our catches are around the 200,000 kilogram mark. And if they did it again, all of a sudden our catches just go around 100,000. Now we're down to less than a tenth of lake whitefish, under 40,000 kilograms. So once we produce some actual verifiable science, Hydro and Manitoba stopped talking to us. They haven't talked to us as agreement holders, as rights holders, in any meaningful way since 2013. They're ignoring what science we produced. They're ignoring our concerns. They're ignoring our traditional ecological knowledge. They do still have the South Inland Lake Environmental Steering Committee, but they're not talking to the agreement holders. They're not talking to the fishers. It's more of a politics at play, and really another public relations program. They slashed the funding significantly to do any scientific studies to a relatively small amount where you can't do anything meaningful or an effective way. One example, before COVID, we met with members of this committee. I was asked by the First Nation to attend. And like mercury is of huge concern to the community and its residents because, we eat a lot of fish, what is supposed to be a healthy food source. The funding that was provided, we would have to do between 3 and 5 years, commit all the funding before you can complete one study. So, that's, you're funding something that you can't accomplish is what Hydro is providing under the oversight of Manitoba.
Yeah, and I guess my last question is often, especially I report on climate change regularly, I'm told about how green and clean Manitoba's energy is, and I'm wondering if you can address how you feel about that being the way that government officials especially put forward Manitoba Hydro energy.
It's untrue. It's a misrepresentation of the facts. Manitoba Hydro electricity is not clean and green. It's hugely destructive to the environment, to the lakes and rivers of northern Manitoba, and in a sense, it's destroying people and communities. It's far from clean and green. There's just not enough actual monitoring and studying and reporting of the damages being undertaken by Manitoba Hydro under the oversight of Manitoba. All they can produce is very dated reports that made projections. I mean, when we talk about augmented flow, that has not been studied at all. And the only report they can point to or proclaim is one done in 1987. Well, all it was a study to see if they could feasibly study augmented flow, and the conclusion was no. Well, and they wave this around like it's a comprehensive study of the environmental effects, and it's not. So no, Manitoba Hydro energy is not clean and green. It's a sensitive issue to me. No, it's a misrepresentation of facts, to put it nicely. I mean, I could choose other words, but I don't think you'd publicize them.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Sarah, I wonder if I could respond briefly in terms of studies from the Tataskweyak standpoint. And I appreciate the fact that this is a lot of information and perspectives to wrap into one story. The Tataskweyak people, with funding from Manitoba Hydro, partially from Manitoba Hydro, are studying the sturgeon populations and movements on the lower Churchill River. That is ongoing. That is work done by fish biologist Mark Loudon and hydrologist Ian Halkett, and they do have some significant findings, and there will be a report coming out hopefully within a few months. And what they're trying, so that's where they've established a population of between 900 to 1,500 breeding adults. They have made presentations and continue to work at getting the lower Churchill sturgeon classified as endangered under the Species at Risk Act. That's a federal act. So that's a decision that could be made at the federal level that would have very significant implications for the operation of the Churchill River Diversion. I would also note that part of the work that they're doing on from a hydrological perspective is to determine what flows would be required, what numbers should be in that license in order to provide a better chance for both the sturgeon and the lake whitefish. So there is scientific work on, and of course Hydro can produce mountains of studies that have been done. The real question there is, like, what have those studies led to? There's still the collapse of these fisheries and a massive mess if you go up there and just look at what's on the ground. So studies, yes. Meaningful change, that's another question. In terms of whether Hydro's clean, just because dams don't have smokestacks does not mean that they are clean.
Yeah, just one more point, Sarah. From a science perspective, Will, I think, has access to the annual fish catch over the last number of years. And there's no question that that fish catch in recent years has been very, very low compared with historically. There's no sign of a rebound. Second aspect would be one would expect an improvement in the mercury levels of fish. And so far, from the science that's been done, there hasn't been an improvement in that is a decrease in the mercury levels of fish. They are still a major concern.
Great, thank you. So are there any other questions? Okay,
Going once, going twice.
Okay, do
All
you
right.
just want to wrap it up, or?
Yeah, I'll just say thank you very much to Leslie and to Will and to John. Thank you for bringing this forward to us. This is an incredibly important issue that we hope we can get some action on. It's to say that it's a huge understatement to say that this has gone on too long when you have over 45 years of interim licenses. It's long past due time. And I'll just add to something that that Mr. Dysart said, which is when you talk about, they call it the augmented flow, which is really just about dumping colossal amounts of water. It hasn't properly been studied, and it's unclear that it even has benefits for hydro. And so when you're doing something that does not have clear benefits for hydro, but that is unquestionably damaging to communities, it needs to be better regulated. It needs to be regulated because right now the interim license is almost like having no license at all for hydro. So it's long past due time for hydro in Manitoba to do the right thing. And thank you very much.
If I can briefly, I'll try to be brief. Again, thank you for the opportunity to speak and share the facts in our story. The minister has recently, or at least the minister's office has recently stated, because of our public campaign on No More License to Destroy, that her office is reviewing the consultation documents before a decision is made on final license. We have to question, how can you review consultation documents if you have not consulted with the community that's at ground zero, south in the lake, the O-Pipon-Na-Piwin Cree Nation? And we raised concern numerous times on how Manitoba Hydro is allowed to control the narrative. This is not how a crown corporation should be allowed to behave and control the decisions that are being made. Thank you again.